Hello, my name is Mike. Okay, I'm going to tell just a series of very short stories. When I was rehearsing this, I got it down to 3 minutes. I think I can do it in 10 because you've all been very patient today. This talk originated when I was walking with my granddaughter in Sheffield, and Abdul Bassett was there, and he comes out of a mosque shouting my name. And I'm looking around and thinking, I don't know this guy. My guess is you all do. But he asked me if I would come down here, and I've just been flattered and delighted and honored since I got here this morning at the energy in the room. I have learned something from every speaker, and I hope the short story I'm going to share with you now taps into some of that. I'm here to talk about research communities. My guess, having looked at the posters, and having listened to the previous speakers, is that many of you, the majority of you, would identify yourself as researchers. I'm here today to talk about research communities. And I've made a little mental note to say in the beginning of this, if you are a member of what is a research community by the time I stop talking, then I think that's wonderful, it's a privilege, and I hope I've said nothing that's offended or upset anybody. But I'm speaking on behalf of the huge number of people all over the world, and in the Middle East in particular, who cannot honestly put their hand on their heart and say they are a member of a research community. Okay? By way of introduction, I am a retired educational psychologist. I spent 33 years working in Derbyshire in the Midlands of England, managing a team of psychologists and teaching at Sheffield University, which is where we met. Wonderful set of experiences, and it's allowed me to go all over the world talking, preaching, acting, writing, editing on the subject of research communities. What I'm bringing with me today comes from the Caribbean, where they take community very seriously. From what little I've picked up, and I haven't been to Libya, it's important to stress that. What I have picked up from the Caribbean, from working with Iraqis in Jordan, and from working in Oman and in Singapore and other parts of the world, is a research community is something that can work. And if there's 1 or 2 or 3 of you who come up at the end of this session and send me an email to this address, I would be very happy to share with you the paper on which it's based. Because with a short sort of presentation like this, there's very little time to talk. The research community that I'm talking about came as a radical, revolutionary reaction to the dominant ideology in higher education and secondary education that's prevalent all over the world today. All right? I'm going to put the microphone down, and I'm going to pick up a jug and a mug, and I hope you can hear me. Has anybody in the room heard of the mug and jug theory of education? Couple? Okay. This is the jug, and I'd like you to think of it as a metaphor. This represents higher education, the university, the professors, the library, the curriculum. This is the university. What it contains is facts, knowledge, truths, however you define it. It's contained in here. This is the mug. In this case, I'm using a transparent glass. The function of the university or a secondary school is to transfer education from here to here. Research communities were the earliest evolution of research communities represent a radical turning around of this proposition that this is all very one way. The university owns it, sells it, packages it, delivers it to consumers who come in with empty heads. Now, when I do this with young kids, they often like to say to me, they find this amusing, they say, we're not empty vessels. But an awful lot of organizations in the world today presuppose that the people coming in, the customers, the students, the people who are paying for tuition, are arriving as empty vessels, and whether it's a bachelor's degree, a master's, a PhD, an MD, you know, someone's going to start pouring this in. Research communities are an alternative to this. They're more interactive, they're more experiential. Okay, I'll pick up the microphone again. Get back to me, text. If you went to see a research community today, what would you look for? What would you hope to see? Well, I would hope to see a small, autonomous group of people working within a university or a secondary school, showing great respect to the authority, to the administration. If there's anybody out there who's a university administrator, I would hope that you don't see my small, little, non-threatening research communities as a threat to your empire. Actually, they would be a phenomenal asset if you took a look at what research communities, little small groups of volunteer students and younger staff can come along and put something together. For a research community to be real, I feel there's some essential attributes that have got to be in there and got to be functioning. One of them is shared values. And I could debate this for hours. If you do not have shared values that have been generated within the research community, where everyone in the group, or mostly everybody in the group, have signed up and said, right, this is what we stand for, these are our principles, this is what we believe in, this is how we work, then you've got the potential of a research community. If you don't have the shared values, I would argue you're not in a research community. And one of my jobs during 33 years as a psychologist was to go into dysfunctional organizations, schools, primary and secondary, that weren't working. And what you'd find out is they might have a mission statement, but they didn't have shared values. Okay, what else needs to be there? Team building, project management, induction, orientation. These things need to be there. Once you've satisfied that sort of essential list, which is in the paper I'll send to anybody who wants to read it, once you've satisfied that, the administration needs to leave the research community to formulate its own identity. It's not an identity that's imposed from the outside. It comes from ground up from within by the volunteers, by the members, by the partners who are in the research community. I would hope there'd be some faculty in there working with this group of people. Another thing we do in a research community is a skills audit, is to take a look at the skills that you've got in your team that are perhaps being underheard or underutilized. We haven't done it today, but it would be fascinating if we took the time to do a skills audit in this room. I'll bet you we would be absolutely blown away if we took a look at the skills that are resident in the hearts, the minds, the heads, the spirits of the people who are sitting in the audience. That's what it's all about. So there's your research community. They've got shared values. We do a lot on team building, a lot on identity. If you came along and said, well, what else does a research community do? It gets a commission. They're not just fooling around. Their work is valued, it's commissioned. Someone, a high school or a secondary head teacher or principal in England, or a university vice chancellor or a dean or somebody commissions the research community to do something. All right, and contained in the paper that I've written are a bunch of examples of research communities that actually have been up and running, that have been, reasonably successful in what they've tried to do. If you said, how do you measure whether a research community is productive? If a research community is really good, and you've got good attendance, good participation, good output, then they would have published, and their work would have been recognized as a legitimate voice coming from the students at a college, a university, or a secondary school. And the most important thing is that they get asked to do some more. If you've got a research community that spends 6 months doing a piece of research, and if it's shoddy research, if it's unethical, if it's not boundaried, if it's not good enough, if it doesn't come up to a high enough standard, that research community will not get a contract to do any more. So the commission dies. That's the acid kind of test. I think what I want to do now is to end by just describing one of several of these research communities I worked with. There's an organization in London called the, Oh, crikey. Mental block. It's an organization that's supporting refugee academics all around the world. CARA, C-A-R-A, the Council for the Assistance of Refugee Academics. And a couple of years ago, I was invited to join that group because they'd found a group of researchers who were looking at TB, at diabetes, at gender, at the curriculum in the medical school, and they were also looking at theater studies in Iraq. And they were working with academics who'd lost their labs, their libraries, their status. They were all dotted around all over the world. Some of them had been tortured, some of them were exiled. And I was invited to work with them. And we spent a year and a half trying to introduce a South American revolutionary notion of forum theater into the curriculum at the University of Basra and the University of Baghdad. I was a little worried before I came here today, wondering what this audience would think about me talking about Iraq. And I've heard some parallels today, some where I suppose a comparison might be helpful, some where it wouldn't. It was too dangerous for us to go into Iraq, those of us from Canada or those of us who were from England. And so we did our work in London, and then we went 3 times to Jordan. And what I'd like to do in closing now, if I can dig it out, is I'd just like to read you one paragraph, okay? I can't think of a more fitting way of pulling this together. This was a team of people that I had the privilege of working with who created a research community. It was already there before they asked me to join. I just came along and tidied up some of this stuff, like saying, let's get these values down. Let's get the ethics down. Let's take a look at what we're trying to do. So I'm just going to read you on page 27 of a book that was published. And we've often heard today how important it is for young, perhaps less well-promoted members of the faculty in a university in the Middle East to get published, particularly to get published internationally. This was their story in a book that's called Re-Imaging Research for Reclaiming the Academy in Iraq, Identities and Preparation in Post-Conflict Inquiry, the Iraq Research Fellowship Program, which CARA supported. And if I turn to page 27, I'm just going to read you a paragraph which is effectively privileging their voices, and I'm doing that as a favor to them. The vision of the TLAT, and that stands for Transforming the Learning Environment Through Theater, became one of a research project designed to explore ways in which interactive theater can contribute to the transformation of teaching and learning and their environments in an Iraqi university. It started from the assumption that some aspects of the learning environment at Basra University were relatively dysfunctional. See if any of this resonates with Libya. Constituting barriers and disincentives to productive interaction amongst teachers and students, authoritarian teaching styles, unbalanced power relations between students and teachers, widespread cheating in exams, and problems of gender relations were among the focal issues to be tackled. The project sought to test the effectiveness of the kind of theatrical practice and pedagogical method pioneered by Augusto Boal, who was from Brazil, in modifying awareness and behavior. The implementation of the process and its impact and effectiveness were to be the objects of a series of research investigations, with the results to be disseminated in the literature on applied theater and shared with other Iraqi universities. I was trying to think, as I end this, how this might spill over to an audience with people primarily concerned with Iraq, and I just want to throw this out. I'd love it if somebody grabs me on the way out and says, hey, we've already done this. I would feel ever so good to think this is happening. If we've got roots, sprouts coming up through revolutions and through changes in attitude and mindset. I have no idea how in universities in Libya, how teaching is evaluated. Many of your speakers today have talked about how it's done in England or Ireland. They've talked about the importance in league tables of ratings. Well, I'd be very so curious to know in Libya, how is it that students in universities or secondary schools evaluate the teaching that's going on, the research that's going on? I'd be dead curious to know. And, most importantly, If the students in a research community could have access to that data, what recommendations would they make in Libya about some of the changes that people in the audience and speakers today have been talking about? What would they be coming up with? And my final point, and this is where research comes in for the scientists in the room, I'd like to come along in 6 months and say, those students in your research community, they made some recommendations, having studied the evaluation of the teaching at any one given university. What was the impact of that? What got done? What happened as a result of what came out of a research community? Thank you very much.